Welcome to a new experiment for us. My name's Lee Damon. I'm with the University of Washington as a senior system administrator and a past chair of the LISA conference. I'm here with Tom. Do you want to
Hi,
introduce yourself?
hi. I'm Tom Limoncelli from StackOverflow.com. Each month, LISA Conversations brings you a speaker from a past Usenix LISA conference and related conferences to follow up on the presentation they made.
And if you're watching live, we'd love your Q&A entries. If you don't see a little Q&A button in the upper corner, you might find a 3x3 grid. Click on that and you should see a Q&A option. Go in there and ask questions for our guest, who is Todd Underwood, the SRE manager at Google, who gave a talk at Usenix in LISA in 2013 entitled Post-Ops, a non-surgical tale of software, fragility, and reliability. Todd, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah,
So
awesome.
we have an opening. Julie, go ahead and select opening questions, if you would, for the question. And
Well,
go ahead.
why don't we start just some introductory stuff. Todd, why don't you tell us about what you do at Google?
So I'm an SRE manager. SRE is now, as you know, a job post that's understood outside of Google, but for a long time it was just something done inside of Google. So when I came to Google to be an SRE, it wasn't entirely obvious what the heck I was signing up for. But now I manage a number of commerce-related teams, so we do things like support the flights.google.com, a bunch of ads targeting systems, ads malware identification systems, shopping.google.com, the payments and billing system. So a bunch of different things. And in the meantime, I have fun trying to solve some of the same kind of problems that I would imagine most systems folks try to solve in various places.
Great, great. And has your position changed since the presentation that you gave?
Not really. I mean, there's always an evolution. There's, I've picked up some new projects and stopped working on some, but no, not fundamentally. I'm still based in Pittsburgh, work with teams in, the Mountain View office in Pittsburgh, in the Cambridge, outside of Boston office, Dublin, Zurich, London. So, yeah, I still work on similar things, although there are some new ones. But the nature of working at Google is you can never talk about what you're working on, only what you have worked on years ago when it doesn't matter anymore.
Okay. The topic today is to talk about the talk that you gave at LISA in 2013, which
Well,
is
let's ask our three opening questions, Tom.
Oh, okay.
So question number one, what was your first computer?
No, I thought we were closing with those.
Opening or closing, you guys got to decide.
We always greet our guest.
Okay, why don't we? Sure.
We'll just ask this one and then do the other two later.
No, let's do all three. Okay, so the first question, as Lee said, what was your first computer?
So the first computer my family had was a Commodore PET.
Cool.
Had a tape drive. Tape drive took forever to do every single thing, so that was disappointing.
I remember my first was a Commodore 64, similar stuff.
Oh, see, you're a youngin'. You had magic stuff. You had like spinning technology and crap. Color. We didn't have color.
Okay, so
yeah, my second computer was a Franklin, which was an Apple II clone. And I grew up in Puerto Rico, and so one of the biggest problems we had, which is not something most of your listeners can identify with, was the humidity was such that computers, just by being in existence, would stop working after 2 or 3 years. Just like they would the circuit boards would just rust, and you would open them up and say, yes, indeed, that's just rusted. It's not going to work anymore. It was very sad.
I see. Okay, question number two. Have you ever gotten to press the big red switch or emergency power off button in a
Never have pressed an EPO in anger.
In anger.
Never have pressed one in anger. Have tested the pressing of one when we knew we were testing it, but never in actual fact. No.
Great. And question number three, who is your favorite computer scientist or author?
I think, I think Dijkstra is pretty impressive. I think Evie Nemeth was pretty impressive. So, yeah.
Great. So let's talk about the talk.
Okay.
Do you want to give a quick summary or talk about the reaction? Let's talk. Maybe we should
Yeah.
summarize first.
I mean, so I was a little bit surprised. I was asked to give a talk at Lisa about some sort of, maybe it was Google's approach or my approach to reliability engineering and systems engineering at Lisa. And I've known about Lisa. I had never managed to attend one, but I'd known about Lisa and read the proceedings and been aware of it for quite some time. And so I kind of pushed back, saying like, I don't think your audience is going to like this talk. Like, I don't think it's going to be popular. I think it's actually going to be a problem. And that's not to say that I don't believe what I believe or that I think, I shouldn't give it, but I just wanted to clarify. And the chairs were like, no, it's okay to have a controversial talk. It's okay, like, as long as you have a reasoned argument. And so I think, like, it's a difficult presentation to make because the point that I'm trying to make there is that I think that we're at a turning point. I think that we're at a transition in the phase of systems engineering and reliability engineering. And I think that in particular we're transitioning from a period of professionalized operations, which had its value and still has a significant amount of value, to systems that are significantly larger and scale and work in significantly different ways and aren't going to be amenable to the same kinds of techniques that we previously used. And so that was what I kind of went in to want to talk about, is to say, like, I think we're at a point of transition. I think that those of us who come from a systems engineering, systems administration background need to look at this with open eyes and, like, embrace the future. Like, it's exciting and it's better in many, many ways, but it's going to be different. So that was what I really wanted to come in and say. I think that the difficulty there is that that can be a threatening message to a lot of people. And I also think that that can be challenging, in particular, saying that as Google, because many people look at Google and say, oh, well, things are different for you guys. They either say, you guys have a lot of money, or you have a lot of software developers, you have a lot of freedom, or you're big, or, they have a variety of different perspectives on what's different about Google. And so people use those to try to disregard the point that people from Google sometimes make, but people at other places are making similar points, right? There are systems engineers and software engineers at Amazon and at Facebook, and also at much, much smaller companies that are making similar points about the engineering problems that they're facing. So I guess that's the summary. I think we're in a phase of great transition. I think that the traditional sort of knowledge and approach that has served systems administrators and network administrators so well for the last 15 to 25 years, I think are not going to serve us as well for the next 15 to 25 years. And I think it's a great time to wake up and take a look at that and see what opportunities there are.
Great. So, I mean, system administration has definitely changed. 20 years ago, we were, sysadmins would solder things, and now, a sysadmin with a soldering iron is rare or maybe just bad for other reasons. I guess, so my recap of your talk is that you were saying that, this as the based on the current evolution and the current needs, we're going to be taking this the old sysadmin adage of you're trying to automate yourself out of a job, and that could actually happen, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about automation, because I think, so hold on, someone in chat did ask if I had a coffee cup as big as my head, and I would like to point out, I think it's significantly larger than my head. So you guys had said this is a serious thing. I came armed with, I don't know, 700 or 800 milliliters of coffee, so I am ready to go. There. That's not just a prop. There's actual coffee in there. Let's talk about automation for a second. There's this adage, automate yourself out of a job. And we've all heard it, and it's actually pretty good. It's a pretty good approach for the highest tier of systems administration going back 5 to 10 years, right? To say, like, okay, we've got a set of constraints. Many of those constraints are somewhat fixed around us, but we have a set of operational requirements, which is keep this set of things running, support these users, make these services work. And so when you have a set of operational requirements and a set of operational constraints, then automating those things so that they're less boring is fantastic. I think what's changing is that many of the constraints are changing. And many of the constraints, it's not right to say that they're going away, but they're being replaced with a different set of constraints. And in particular, I think the migration to cloud is a big deal. It's a big deal for certain kinds of system services. It puts many sysadmins on the defensive, which is, I think it's okay. It's like we should face new technology. We should face these kinds of challenges. So when I look at people who say, automate yourself out of a job, it's a normal thing, like this is nothing new, I want to contrast automation with building infrastructure and say automation, when people talk about it, it doesn't have to be, but it is often an approach to taking an existing process and making that process sort of behave automatically. So we used to talk back in the day about taking a bad business process and pouring concrete COBOL all over it so that the bad business process could never change, because now it was encased in COBOL that nobody wanted to change and nobody understood and was running on the OS 390 box that everybody hated, but still ran pretty well. Great. So we've been there, and like that's bad. We don't want to do the same thing in the sort of microcomputer or servers in our departments era where we pour sort of concrete automation based on going back as far as expect or as recently as Ruby on Rails stuff. Like what we want to do is build flexible systems that are constantly evolving. And I think building a system that's amenable to most end users doing more for themselves, and in particular most developers doing more for themselves, is very different from automating a set of operational requirements. So I don't know, does that answer the question, Tom, or you want to like redirect me into something more coherent?
Let me say back to what I think I heard to see if I got it right. So, so what I heard you say is rather than automate your job, you're saying the role of system administration is evolving to be more like create infrastructure that other people can use so that they can do their job better, and possibly, I guess if you provide an API, they can automate their job also.
I think that's right. Yes, I think that's a really concise, really nice way of saying it.
Yeah, I've always felt that the best thing we can do is to make it easy to do the mundane stuff so that we can focus on making life better for our users.
Well, and so this is, like, I think this is a really good point, Lee, and something that frustrates me a little bit when people get nervous about this set of changes. Like, I think that the set of changes that we're seeing to internet-facing production infrastructure are wonderful. Like, I think, like, I'm not saying that all the cloud stuff is perfect and it's super early days. It's all going to get much, much better. But so many of the APIs and so many of the services are so much cleaner and so much better than anything we have had in the past that I think we should be rushing to embrace it and say, fantastic, if I never have to rack and stack another set of servers because instead of being done by the cabinet, that's being done by the data center, that's being done as part of the data center build by someone else, that's great. Like, it's not that I don't enjoy from time to time actually pulling and terminating cable, but like it's not a good idea, right? Like that's better done at industrial scale, and then that leaves me more time to actually engage with sort of interesting questions and challenging questions and challenging computer science problems about how do I build infrastructure that serves the needs of all of my users, right? So I'd love to see people who think of themselves now as systems administrators start thinking of themselves as production infrastructure engineers, right, whose job is to help provide their users the kind of production infrastructure that their users can use to solve their own problems as much as possible.
So what about shops like HPC and small research shops and shops that still need to do desktop support? How can we enable them to do this type of thing when maybe the cloud isn't the right answer for HPC, for example?
Yeah, well, so I think so So I think HPC and desktop support are probably two pretty different circumstances. Would you agree? Can I sort of separate those?
Yeah. I'm using those as examples of ends of spectrum.
Right, that's right. Okay, so on the desktop support, like I think that the right approach there is to get to a point where like our desktop operating systems are not terrible. Like I think we can all agree our desktop operating systems are less terrible than they used to be, right? I'm not saying they're good. I'm just saying they suck so much less than they did 5 or 8 years ago, right? So what if that just keeps happening? So like what if printing kind of works? And what if web browsing works? And what if they're securable and centrally maintainable by automated processes? And what if like they just update themselves? Like what if they can just suck so much less that that's not a thing? It's not a thing we do is answer a lot of desktop support questions. So then desktop support becomes training, becomes education, becomes enabling a set of platforms. So like for example, the people who maintain all of the Macs at Google don't deal with me. Like they don't know my name. I turn on my Mac and like new software is installed and it more or less works. And when it doesn't work, it's probably also broken for 10,000 other users. And so there's no point in them talking to me. They just fix that system that works. So on the desktop side, I know it's a little bit of a pipe dream, but I do think that it is. Those are going to keep getting better until desktop support eventually goes away as a thing we do. The HPC side, I think, is a really interesting case where those guys are not going to use cloud. They're not going to use public cloud. Those guys are going to build cloud infrastructure themselves, as they've been doing. Like I have a background in HPC. I went to a graduate school at UNM and worked on the C plant at Sandia for a little while. And so we did a lot of fun stuff, and I think that's not what most people think of as like straight up systems administration. That's like building clusters, and those are weirder clusters. Like they use Myrinet, or they use they use weird clustered file systems that aren't really suitable for general purpose but work for particular workloads. So I think that's fine. I think that is an approach to building production infrastructure, and in those cases there's a very tiny number of very demanding end users, i.e. the scientists who are doing modeling on this stuff.
So Adrian Culley has an interesting question. It's kind of a follow-up to this question. He asks, can a platforms engineer really do the job without extensive operations experience? If there are no sysadmins, how will anyone get that experience?
See, I wish Adrian were. We've got to ask follow-up questions to the questions. Damn it.
That's what the Q&A is for.
Yeah, so I think it is true that I don't want to say operations experience, although I know what Adrian means. I want to say like production experience. Like I do think that having experience maintaining an SLA, maintaining something like in production, usable by people, gives you a particular mindset and sets a particular set of instincts. But I don't think that means that you have to have a purely operational approach. And the best counterexample I have is like Google's SRE organization, and this is actually true of Facebook's SRE organization, and as far as I know, LinkedIn's and Amazon's and a bunch of other people's SRE organizations. We have an approach that both respects a tradition of production engineering and SLA. It's like tries to maintain an SLA, define an SLA, keep things up and running to that SLA, publishes error budgets, tries to like let people innovate within them, all of that stuff. But at the same time, like we are engineers, and we don't just like respond to pages, close tickets, say no. Like we are not like very, very cranky bastard operators from hell. We in fact are engineers who are also building some of the production systems and iterating on the production systems that we work on. So I do think that production experience and a production sensibility is important, but I don't think it's the case that you need a purely operational approach to do that. I hope Adrian thinks I answered this question. Yeah. Well, we're going to pretend that I answered Adrian's question.
Okay, sure. So Corey also asked a follow-up question a little earlier. Feels like system management has been adding abstraction layers over the last 10 years with the view that it's turtles all the way down. eventually there's still bare metal at the bottom. How do managers of those systems fit in? I think that's orthogonal and yet related to what we've been talking about, like, for example, the HPC clusters and desktops.
Yeah, so I think this is actually a bigger problem for software engineers than it is for like people, pure product development software engineers, than it is for pure SREs. So it has been consistently the case that computer education over the last 25 years has taught people less and less and less about how computers are actually built and how they work, right? I forget, Joel on software has a whole piece about, like, no one who grew up coding in Java could have possibly written MapReduce because they don't understand how computers work, right? He's got a couple of these pieces, and they're like classic Joel on software, a little bit overstated, but in a good way. Like his point is, like, if you don't know what an ALU is, and you don't know what a register is, and you don't have kind of a notion of what an L1 and L2 cache might do, or that there are cache lines and that they get invalidated, like if you don't know any of that basic computer architecture stuff, it's actually really difficult to write certain kinds of software, which doesn't mean you can't write a web app with forms and have people fill it in, or flying buttons or a little cat with a rainbow trailing behind it. Sure, but you can't write super scalable big stuff. I think it's still true that there is most systems administrators, even going back 20 years, didn't have a really, really firm understanding in logic gates or in electrical engineering. Like, that was not something that was required, and some did, certainly. Like, I've worked with talented people who are like, let me go solder that, or I will go reprogram these part of this CPU. I'm like, what? You can't do that. But most of us didn't. Most of us were like, well, like, I can look at a CPU die and know that part of it's the cache and part of it's the ALU, but that's it. Like, I'm out. I know what an AND gate and an OR gate is, but that's it, right? Like, that's kind of my limit. And yet we did pretty well. So I think that it's okay that we are abstracting a little bit away from the very, very bottom level of, how are these computers, like, what shape does a computer have and how is it plugged into a cabinet? Is that a relevant question? Like, I would say, like, for many, many people still today, that's a super relevant question. Like, do you like the rack mount case that you got from Dell? What did you think of the rackable stuff? Is there somebody else who, like, are super micro cases junk or are they awesome, right? What I'd like to do is say, like, oh, is that the best and highest use of your creative energy? Is that really where you want to spend your time and expertise? And it could be, like, for some people it is, but I think for the vast majority of people who are systems administrators, there's more interesting questions. So I'm not sure. So I think it's okay to establish a point below which we say, yeah, below that, as long as you have a very clear understanding of how things work, you can sort of stop digging into the details.
Yeah, I agree. I think just like in any team, everyone knows a little bit about everything, and then you have some specialists. Everyone knows a little about databases, but then you have the DBA who really knows them well. I think in the future you'll have the one person who really does understand hardware architecture well, and can be deeply involved in the performance issues and the early architecture decisions. I think Google's Jeff Dean did something really brilliant when he made that chart of the ratio of comparing the duration of time it takes to read a block off a disk versus reading out of memory versus L1 cache and all these other things, because it spreads that knowledge to the rest of the team. And it's not going to make everyone on the team a super expert in hardware architecture, but it gives them a cheat sheet so that they have a coping mechanism.
That's right. And I think, I think you can't do a good job writing certain kinds of software if you think that, like, RAM and spinning platters of hard disks are kind of similar in their access patterns, and, like, it's not going to work out for you. You're going to make horrible mistakes, right? You need to know how RAM behaves. And likewise, I think Flash over the last 5 years has really come up for systems architects and for SREs and for systems administrators, saying, like, oh, well, there's different constraints and different performance patterns here that we weren't aware of. Like, there's garbage collection that happens on flash drives. Like, damn it, that wasn't a thing that was in my model of I/O, and now it needs to be. So yeah, it's important to understand that stuff, but you don't have to understand like exactly how an L1 cache works or how fetches to RAM happen. Like you just need to know roughly the characteristics of the operations.
Sure. So let's say you and everyone on your team has totally gotten buy-in on the whole post-ops world. Nothing's going to change in an organization if management also doesn't buy in, and that can be the most difficult part because it's a big change. How would you recommend people talk to their management about making these kind of strategic changes?
Yeah, I think it's really tough, and it's really an important question. Like I am a manager, I'm probably not a very good one, but I at least recognize that there's a set of tasks here that are management, and they're important, and there's lots of bad managers, and there's some good managers in the world. And so pretending that, like, oh, we'll just go around your management or we'll, somehow convince them while they're not looking is not going to work. Like this has to be, for organizations have to make a conscious decision to approach their computing infrastructure very differently. And I'll give you like an example of an industry where this isn't happening and isn't going to happen. So healthcare, IT in healthcare is an unmitigated disaster, right? It's been underfunded for years and years and years. It's the dumping ground of some of the worst technology that we've seen. I don't want to overstate it and make people in healthcare angry, but like it's not good. It is not good at all. And there's lots of evidence from that. You can talk to physicians, you can talk to nurses, you can talk to hospital administrators, and they all acknowledge they all say IT costs. First of all, they call it IT. IT costs are too high, and none of it works right. And I'm like, so you're not using any of this to actually enable your business. You're not using any of this to serve patient needs. Well, you are, but that's not how you think of it. You think of it as a cost to be minimized. And as long as that happens, you're going to get bad results, but also pay too much money. So there are definitely industries that are going to struggle with this kind of cultural change. I guess on the positive side, what I would say is you can point to organizations that have had a successful approach of building production infrastructure in a different way, of taking an SRE-like approach, which is something we've been advocating because it works for us and because we think it's interesting and probably can work for a lot of other people too, beyond Google. And I think saying, look, like it worked for them. Who else does it work for? Like Google's pretty big. Google's got some differences from us. Who else does it work for? Well, maybe this kind of approach is working for Tumblr. Maybe this kind of approach is working. Okay, but maybe they're big too, and it's all internet-centric. But maybe this kind of approach is working for some other financial services organizations. Or maybe, so I would say the first step is find organizations that are the least different from your organization possible who have already tried some of this and see if they've had some improvement. I think the line that Ben Traynor has used pretty effectively for people who have a computing service that's important to their organization is to say reliability is the most important feature. Reliability is the most important feature of any computing, of almost anything. But if it doesn't work, it actually doesn't matter what color the buttons are because it's not loading on the web page, right? Because it's not printing, because it's not possible to use. And so, if you don't treat reliability as a core feature of every application you roll out, of every capability you try to deploy to your users, well, then you probably won't get reliability. So I think approaching management and saying this is about taking ourselves seriously. This is about taking our infrastructure and our users seriously. It doesn't have to cost much more money. It really doesn't. Some of this stuff, if you look at how much Google spends staffing our computing infrastructure per server, per query, per byte stored, whatever, it's way less than everyone else. This approach is actually really, really effective, but it's a super bumpy transition for some organizations, or it will be.
Sure, and just for our audience, who's Ben Traynor?
Ben Traynor is the titular head of SRE at Google. He's sort of the guy who invented the SRE term. He was he gave a nice keynote speech at the SRECon in San Jose last year called the Keys to SRE. That was a Usenix conference hosted in San Jose, and he gives a nice history of it. Essentially, he was a young, talented software engineer who was asked to run production engineering at Google, and so some combination of his brilliance and ignorance created SRE. And here, like Google did that, and it's worked for us. And a bunch of other similar and some very dissimilar organizations have taken this SRE-like approach as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. So you said your recommendation for convincing management was to find a similar organization. One thing that I've and try to use that as a basis of comparison. One thing that I've noticed is it is such a mental mind shift. It's such a totally different way of doing SRE, doing system administration, that people don't call it system administration. So Google calls it SRE. The famous, actually in your talk you mentioned the the no-ops blog post that caused such a controversy. I reread that recently, and with a little bit of distance, I was able to interpret differently. I think what he was really saying is they got IT right, and it's so different that they have to call it something else, and and they're looking for a title. And also, Amazon and everyone's come up with a different term. So, do you think that's part of it? Is the part of the marketing is to say we're going to do IT so differently that we're going to call it something different?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure that's part of it. Just for completeness, let's give credit to that was Adrian Cocroft at Netflix who had the no ops post.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Tom. I think the point that he was trying to make there, like he was looking at it from a developer point of view, and he was saying, if I'm a developer in a traditional organization, standing between me and my users is this group of people called system operators or system administrators whose main job is to get in my way. That's how developers feel about us, right? So like his point was, if you do it right, there's no one in the way. Like, and this goes back to Lee's original question a little while ago, is like enabling your users. If your users are your developers who are developing a platform or developing an application, then I think the thing that you want to do is get out of their way, right? Like you need to provide a secure, safe, scalable environment so that like clean APIs, automatic rollback testing, blah, blah. Like there's a whole bunch of work that you have to build to make this possible. But if you get a lot of it right, then developers don't need to talk to you. They don't need to ask permission. They're like, I'm launching a thing, and I know it scales right because I did it in a prescribed way, and I know that it's monitored because I use these libraries and they automatically invoke the monitoring, and I know it's on the capacity plan because I made these calls or I filled out these things or I did this in this manifest and I know now I'm on the capacity plan, and so on and so forth. Like, if I, as a developer, can just do the stuff that I'm told to do in a particular way that's not difficult for me, then nobody stands in my way, and that's great. And so, yeah, you can call that system administration, the people who build those systems and oversee them. But instead of supporting an application or 1,000 applications, you're supporting the infrastructure that enables those applications. And I think that for most of us is awesome, and it's more exciting, and it's more challenging, and it is interesting. So, yeah, but I think you're right. I think there's a certain amount of branding there of just trying to create a division and saying, there's a difference here. This is not what we had been doing before.
So I want to remind our live listeners that we're looking for questions, and you can go to the Q&A button up in the top. If you don't see it, look at the 3x3 grid, click on that, and you should see a Q&A. Feel free to ask a question. So back two questions. You speak of don't run it with the software that's, if you get software that's bad from the developing team and they've just thrown it over the wall, I believe was the phrase you used. How do we push back? I've worked at sites where software was thrown over the wall. My management said, yeah, okay, and we got paged 3 o'clock every morning because we had to reboot all the machines because there was such bad memory leaks, and we couldn't push back. What can we do about that?
Yeah, so to some extent, that sounds like a terrible situation. Let's imagine a similar situation, but with maybe better or justification. Maybe there was good justification. Like, why do you think your management said, yeah, it's okay, do it? Really? Come on, you have some theory, Lee. Like, why did they say that this
I
is
have
fine?
theories. I just don't want to get.
You just don't want to say them in public. All right, fine. Let me imagine. So I think it's possible for management to say, and software is all terrible. There's something. Every piece of software anybody's ever written is wrong in some way. That's fine, right? So this software was wrong in this particular way. As someone responsible for a business or a set of capabilities, it's completely reasonable to say this set of faults is acceptable given some value or some constraint that we have. Okay, so that's fine. Maybe they did that in this case. But in general, I think those cases where things are thrown over the wall like that are cases where interests are very disaligned. And you're giving me crap for using reify, but now I'm about to use externality. So here we go. Basically what's happened is the software development group has created the operations headache as an externality. They don't pay any of the cost for it. So their job is to cram features in there and fling it at you as fast as they can while running in the opposite direction, right? And that all works for them. Like in the case you described, like they shipped bad code and you got paged. This is like, let's you and him get into a fight, right? They don't pay any of the cost for that. So I think that the right thing to do, the right thing to do is have better management. The right thing to do as an individual in that case is tough to say. Like, you need to convince your management that the things that they care about are not actually being accomplished, or you need to understand how the things that they care about are being accomplished. Or you need to find someone that cares about similar things to what you care about. Those to me seem like that's the solutions-based lead. So it's quite possible that your management cares about some similar things that you do, and they don't understand how those things are being harmed. Does that make sense? Like that. So sometimes your job is to just expose, like, this is really bad for users. This is bad for the organization. This is bad for my department. This is bad for you. Like exposing that, they may not understand that. If they do understand that and they just don't care about you or your team, that's a very different kind of challenge.
That's a good lead to the next question. We got a question from a viewer, Rodrigo Campos, who says, not directly related to the talk, but how would you describe the manager's role in an SRE team?
I think a lot of these questions about management, including the last question and this question, are super context specific. So I'll talk about at Google. There's a set of constraints that change things at other places. So at Google, we think it's super important that people can change teams when they want to. So people have the latitude to walk away from bad teams. So in the case Lee was just describing, if I were on a team like that and it wasn't getting fixed and I didn't trust my management there, I would just go to a different team. And so that's not true at many organizations, but it's super important here. What that means is that the manager's role is really like a combination of recruiting, like their job is to recruit good people to a team, because again, when people can change teams, you have to convince them that your team is exciting. Articulating the priorities of the team, which is not setting them, but trying to convince people of them. We have a pretty high freedom and high responsibility kind of environment here. Netflix talks a lot about this in their environment as well. Freedom and responsibility, meaning like you're responsible for stuff, and you get all of the responsibility for when it breaks, but you have all of the freedom to figure out how to fix it. That's certainly how things work at engineering here at Google as well. So I think as a manager, your job is to articulate the technical priorities. There's a little bit of just like helping people with personal problems or helping with scheduling, or somebody's out on maternity or paternity leave and you gotta like support their responsibilities while they're away. But most of it is about recruiting, most of it is about setting the tone and the priorities, and articulating a direction for the team. And then if you set the culture right, you can actually do some technical work on the teams that you work on, and people can contradict you and correct you when you get it all wrong, which happens to me frequently. But that's just That's just me. Getting it all wrong is actually one of my professional specialties. So yeah, so that's what I would say. And I think that the managers, like if we all reflect back on managers that we've enjoyed working for, I think there are people that we learned a lot from who supported us but who didn't get in our way, which doesn't mean that they didn't disagree with us. Because that learned a lot sometimes comes from you say, I'm going to do X, and the manager's like, hold on there a second, let's think this through, because I think that might be a terrible idea. And 15 minutes later you conclude, that was a terrible idea, and now I understand why. Well, that's great, right? There's like you learn something from your manager. On the other hand, if you were right, that's the right idea, you want to end the conversation 15 minutes later saying, and see, that's why I'm going to do it, and have your manager go, okay, if it all falls to hell, good luck with all that. Clean up all of the pieces yourself, please. Right? So, yeah, I think that from my perspective as a manager and the managers that I work with, like I want them to do those things for their teams.
So are you saying that managers should, by definition, also be technical people?
I don't know how. I don't think you can competently manage in an organization that cares about technology without understanding how any of it works. Like it doesn't make it. It doesn't mean like I mean, there's all kinds of examples. There was a someone was posting something about some web application when I first joined Google, and they're like, they made some on some mailing list. They made some assertion like to someone else, oh, you did that wrong because this is what's in the database. And like a very senior manager, actually, I think in this case it was Ben Traynor, came on the list and said, like, I looked at the code and you connect to MySQL, but you don't ever check the return code. So from my perspective, you don't even know what happens in the next line of code because you don't know if you're connected to the database. So as soon as you start making claims about like what's true because the code does this, you can't make those claims. Your code doesn't do that. Well, that's a little weird example, but it's a good example of how if you have technical management, they can have insight into what the priorities are. They can have insight into what's true and what's not about the fact that they're being given. So, yes, I think management has to have at least some deep technical expertise. It doesn't mean that they have to be on call in all cases for production services. It doesn't mean they have to write a lot of application code or do a lot of network engineering. But like, if you have network engineering managers who don't really know how optics work at all, well, they're never going to be able to run a big network at scale because they're going to like, oh, I think there's lasers somewhere. Well, that's probably not quite enough to actually build a big network. I think there's lasers somewhere, right? Likewise, anyway, so yeah, if you're building big internet applications and your management doesn't know what a distributed hash might look like or what kind of characteristics it might have, they don't have to remember particular hashing algorithms, although that'd be nice, but they have to know what a hash is and that one exists and what kinds of things it might be useful for. So yeah, I don't think I could ever work at a place where like the management of the technology portion of the business wasn't themselves technical.
So I'm going to take this I'm going to disagree with you. How's that?
Great.
The best manager I ever had, much to my surprise, was actually an MBA. He was really good at being a manager. And one of the good things he did was to say, I hired you guys to be the technical experts. You be the technical experts. And he had a technical lead who basically took care of the technical parts of it while he made sure that the management-y things happened. He kept his employees happy and productive. So I don't think you necessarily have to have that all wrapped up in one person, but a good manager will need to understand their limits.
Yeah, no,
and know when to get out of the way.
Yep, I think that's a really good counterpoint. I have seen, like I've certainly worked in, like I'm a manager at Google, and most of the teams that I've worked on have had a tech lead who wasn't me. So I didn't try to set the detailed technical direction of the team. But here's the problem with the model that you just described as the organization gets somewhat larger. So ultimately, your team is doing some things, and you need to send an emissary to some other context. Some other team is doing something that impacts your team. Either you want to use something of theirs, or they want to use your service, or something, right? So who's that emissary going to be? Well, normally it would be your manager, but if you don't trust your manager to understand the technical constraints of your team, then they can't adequately represent your team because they can't make any commitments, and they can't call bullshit. I'm not supposed to say that. Well, I did. I guess there's no FCC here. They can't call BS on any of the claims that other people are making about your technology or what it can and can't do. So they're not actually useful as a negotiator on behalf of your team. So then you have to send the tech lead. And that's okay until that becomes most or all of what the tech lead does, until the communications overhead and the management and coordination overhead gets so large that the tech lead is now just a manager, right? So
that is something that needs to be carefully observed.
Yeah.
Moving on a little bit, we have a question from John Aristed. I think I said his name wrong, and I apologize. Looking at current trends in infrastructure solutions and components, what is your vision of the future, 5 to 10 years? Example, cloud, converged infrastructure, software-defined X. What do you think will stay, go away, or evolve?
I think we're going to have software-defined X for many values of X.
As long as it's not 11.
That's it. Oh, yeah. This is going to go to 11. So I'll just say this because I gave a reprisal of my Lisa talk at SRECon in Dublin a few months ago, and I just started been thinking through some of these ideas. Most people I know who are SREs, system administrators, any kind of production engineers have always hated the term cloud. Like, we think it's dumb. It's just pure marketing. It's annoying. It's frustrating. But it's actually the term that's going to stick. And like, I'm working hard. I'm in cloud recovery right now. I used to just reflexively call it cloud or clown. I would say like, oh, there's a clown system going on, another clown storage infrastructure. But all right, so I'm trying to say, and so the world is going to call it cloud. Cloud is going to make everything much, much better for many people. And for those of us that have worked at places with good and interesting infrastructure, cloud doesn't seem like that big a deal. We're like, oh, I mean, it's cool that I could spin up a VM or have a container, I guess. It's cool to have this distributed storage thing. It's not world-changing, but it's pretty cool. But that's not who it's dramatically better for. It's dramatically better for the municipal governments or the energy companies or the manufacturers who had like NT boxes and Windows 2000 boxes in the corner and like are spending dozens and dozens of people just spinning up servers to do random stuff, right? And so for those people, this is world-changing potentially. So I think in 5 to 10 years, we're going to get cloud and get it more right. We are going to agree on a set of common services that we expect from all the cloud providers, which I don't think we have now. So I think we're going to converge on containers. I think VMs are the wrong level of abstraction. But I think that tasks are not amenable to most people's workloads. So some people don't know, but the Google Borg system has much more of a job and task approach. And the world at large was kind of converging on virtual machines. And so virtual machines are too heavyweight and hard to manage, but tasks are too dissimilar from what most people's software looks like. So I think we're going to end up with containers, and containers are good. And then I think we're going to have a lot more of a common set of understandings about what we expect from that kind of distributed compute environment. So we're going to want CDNs to deploy our software. We're going to have a common sense of what kind of structured data storage systems we have, and so on. So that's what I expect to see over the next 5 to 10 years. 5, 10 is too far. 10 is too far out in this industry to predict anything.
Great. Thanks for that. So we have another question from Adrian Colley, who says, it sounds like you're saying that sysadmins should aspire to become SREs. What should SREs aspire to?
So I'm not sure we know. One of the things that I think is useful to know, and Tom, you know this from having lived through some of this, is that these job roles are still evolving. Like, sometimes when people say like, this is the way we do things at X, like there's no like, the way we do SRE at Google today is clearly evolved from some set of ideas that Ben Traynor had over a decade ago, but it's not the same. It's not like we've updated it and changed, and we're constantly trying to refine it. So I'd like to say that people who work on production systems should aspire to be excellent production engineers. I think that we should aspire to have better software skills, better systems architecture skills. I think we should evolve away the toil and drudgery of our work and try to find a state where we are building systems that enable our users to be productive rather than repetitively performing operational tasks or even automating operational tasks. So that's the weaselly, imprecise, wordy answer. That's what you get, Adrian.
So you say that Google problems are everyone's future problems. Are they our problems yet?
Yeah, I think that they are. I think, here's a good example. So, a long time ago, Google said, you got to have distributed consensus. And they published this paper about Chubby, and they talked about the Paxos algorithm and how important it is at Google and how we use it. Fine. Right? Everyone else said, that sounds like computer science and fancy and complicated. We don't need that. And then people started migrating their workloads into distributed computing environments with many more computers, and they realized this question of which one am I? You're a task running, and you're like, what am I supposed to do? Who am I? Where am I? These are actually we used to just run programs on computers, and the computers had cutesy names. We used to name them after rivers. Some people, now we're just R03S2Z59. That's not. Nobody knows what computer that is, and it's just deploying some instance of some job. And so, the problem of distributed configuration and distributed consensus went from that's a fancy thing that only people like Google need to, now that's a problem everybody needs to solve. And that's why etcd has become really popular, and that's why Console is becoming popular, because people have figured out, this isn't my problem because I'm at Google. This is all of our problem. If you want to run a thing in a bunch of different places, it's going to have to figure out where it is, who it is, and what it's supposed to be doing. And doing that in a distributed, reliable fashion is not trivial. It's not super hard. It's a solved problem, but you have to actually use some of the good approaches. So I would say that for each of the problems that Google is facing now, there's a variant of that problem that is already the problem of many of the people listening today.
Excellent. So we're getting close to the end of our time. I was wondering if there's anything you'd like to say, or add?
No. So I think some of this talk feels a little bit negative sometimes, and I want it to be positive. I think this is a really exciting time to be someone from a systems heritage, to be someone who has been a system administrator or a systems engineer. I think this is super exciting times. I think there are parts of our jobs that are changing a lot, but our jobs have always changed a lot, right? And for people who are good enough at their jobs and curious enough about their jobs to be listening into something like this, or going to Lisa, or being a member of LOPSA, these are people who know you got to learn stuff. You got to keep learning stuff. And so this is just another opportunity of saying, we got to learn some more stuff. Stuff is changing again, and it's exciting. So the message I want to leave people with from the perspective of this, post-ops notion is, we are going to change the way we do production engineering, all of us. And that's okay. It's actually going to be great. And we're going to shift from supporting users to supporting systems that let users do more things themselves. We've already been doing that. We're going to keep doing that, and it's going to get more extreme. And this is going to be an exciting time.
Cool. So we do have one more question I want to get to. It comes from Doug Hughes, who asks, what's the story behind the giant coffee cup?
So the backstory is, so one of the things that we work on in Google Pittsburgh is the Google Shopping set of infrastructure. And they have a whole set of so retailers have databases that are of very uneven quality. And so one of the hardest things to do is to figure out what products a retailer actually has. So they have a bunch of automatic categorization systems. So one of the things that's hard to do is to figure out if you've correctly categorized an object. And the hardest thing to do is to categorize an object that's like a, coffee cup lid. And you might categorize it as a coffee cup because you don't correctly notice that it's actually a lid. And in this case, this was listed in somebody's catalog as large coffee cup, but it didn't say the actual size in any metadata describable way. And so this was given as like one of the interesting. So we just bought it, of course, because we're like, oh, like So someone down in the shopping organization was like, we're just going to buy it because we need some things around to really remind people. So one day, a coworker of mine, Mark Rice, knew I was on my way in, and I was dropping off my daughters at school, and he spent like 20 minutes brewing it until it was almost completely full, and we estimated it to be about 2.5 liters of coffee. And he challenged me to drink it, and of course, I spent all day trying to drink. The beginning of the day, I was prideful. I will admit, I was arrogant. I was wrong in every respect. But I started the day thinking, I will conquer the coffee. And by 3:30, after having heated it up 4 or 5 times in the microwave and only being about halfway done, I gave in to the coffee. I did not finish the cup of coffee. So that is the story of it.
Awesome.
So then people took pictures of me with the coffee, and now I was asked by some people when I was mentioning this event if I would bring the cup. So I brought the cup.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our first Usenix Lisa Conversations episode. We hope that the people watching, as well as our participant here, enjoyed it. I want to thank Todd Underwood from Google for joining us. And I would clap, but that's really dépassé at this point, I believe. I'd like to remind our viewing audience and those who watch this video later that we will be doing this as a monthly thing between now and Lisa, and if it goes well, we will continue after the November Lisa. Next month, our guest will be Ben Rockwood, who will be discussing his Lisa 2014 talk, I Am Sysadmin and So Can You. Check the website for details.
And also join us at the next Usenix Lisa conference. Watching these recorded videos is fun, but nothing compares to being at the conference itself. The next Lisa is November 8th through 13th, 2015 in Washington, D.C. Limited registration is open now, and full registration will open up mid-August. We hope to see you there. This is Tom Limoncelli.
Full registration will also include the full schedule, by the way.
Yes.
And this is Lee Damon. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Bye.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks.